RIPOUT is an FPS shooter set in the horror genre where you get to have your very own pet gun. Let's talk about that. So you mentioned, this is kind of the first time you guys made an FPS in the horror genre. So what kind of drew you to that specifically?
Well, I think a lot of us are fans of both FPS and horror, and personally it's one of my favorite genres. Like FPS back in 90s was the reason I got addicted to games. This is we said since we are really doing everything that we want to do at this point, like I said, it goes back to the Pod Project studio. We really want to do something that we're all excited about, and that's an FPS. And horror, we're all fans of horror, not specifically maybe game horror, but horror in general, like 80s horror movies. That's something that we all like, and we did do a retro vibe to the games because of this. Like we really like The Thing or The Fly or the first two Alien movies, and we wanted aesthetics and some nostalgic input from those movies to go into the games. So that's one of the reasons that it's horror themed.
When you're making a horror game compared to just any other title, whether it's a regular FPS or something else in general, is it more difficult to bring it into a horror aspect, or does it add a certain level of difficulty to what you're trying to create, or is it just a regular part of making another FPS game? It's kind of just another element on top of that.
It is more difficult, not to make a horror game specifically, but it is more difficult to make an action horror game because it's easy to lose that horror aspect. I mean, we do have a horror theme to it, but it doesn't mean it's going to be horror. Like Doom is horror themed, but it's not a horror game. It's a heavy action game, and trying to find a balance between it being just pure scary atmosphere and doing a lot of shooting is difficult. So that's something that we're trying to handle. Balance between action sequences and slow burning atmospheric tension scenes and tension levels inside the game. So that's the difficulty for us. It's really easy to just go into all guns blazing and have a lot of explosions and a lot of monsters coming at you, and that stops being scary very, very soon. So it's still something that we're working on.
And the game is a co-op. So with that in mind, is there a single player element to it, or is that completely removed from the game?
Absolutely there is. Absolutely. We definitely set off by deciding we want this kind of game to be played by one person, and it will work perfectly. And friends can join in, you can call in friends, and you can join and explore these derelict ships, and there will be some elements that change when there are people with you, and obviously it's less scary when people are with you, but it's more difficult. So it's again a balancing issue between horror and action, but definitely as soon as you put more people, it's not as scary. So that's why we wanted to have a single person experience as well. So you can choose.
From the co-op aspect of it, how many players does that support, and is there kind of a multiplayer element to that where you can pick up different players online, or is that not something you guys have really looked at this point?
You can pick up different people online, but not play against them. So there is not going to be any PvP. There were some ideas about how would the PvP work inside a derelict and getting to an objective against other opponents, like for instance the Hunt game does. But so far we're really focused on cooperation and that feeling that you're going into the unknown with a couple of your friends. So that there's going to be, it's a 3-player co-op at this point, not 4-player co-op, because as soon as we put 4 players, it was too chaotic and it was too action oriented, and we lost that kind of not only horror element but also the tactical elements.
Going from a single player to 3 players, obviously there's a gap in the difficulty just by adding those players. So how do you kind of balance those difficulty levels from just being 1 player up to 3?
There is an element of loot that you pick up that is going to be distributed differently. there is an element of enemy difficulty themselves. So we don't want to just put a bunch of more enemies, because this is not a horde shooter. We want to keep it as few enemies as possible on the screen. So real difficult enemies, we really want few of them on screen. We want player to focus on a specific monster and go for its weak spots and attachments, and coordinate with the team how they're going to take it down. So we're going to make these monsters more difficult, and probably going to have ammo and health balances as well to make it challenging for 3 players as well as for 1 player.
There's a heavy focus on different mission types within the game itself. So kind of talk to me about the different ones that are going to be available. And then with that in mind, talk to me about the level structuring itself within the game.
The main idea was that we don't know how they're structured or where the monsters are going to be coming from, and what kind of combinations of monsters you're going to get. So we started with that, and we realized that we had to have that procedural element to the game, where the areas themselves are going to attach to each other and create the layout of the ship different each time. So it's an infinite number of combinations. We're going to give like a lot of input into the like a lot of areas that we're going to hand make, and then they're going to be combined differently, and elements inside those areas are also going to be interchangeable. The idea was to get into the ship. You don't know where the next exit is. You don't know what the next room is going to have or what it's going to be. We don't want the players to learn the levels by heart and then replay them. We definitely want it to be a fresh experience each time you enter a mission. And the missions themselves are going to vary from finding certain secrets of the ships, or trying to prevent destruction of that ship, or destroying that ship if it's too infected, trying to find and kill certain types of monsters, defend certain parts of rooms until you get the info from the ship. So it's going to vary.
The procedurally generated aspect of the game itself, from a technical standpoint, how does that impact development as a whole? Is it a juggling act trying to cut down on load screen times and stuff like that? So how does that impact kind of how you approach development of the game?
Well, it definitely has some difficulties in that you don't know where the exit is going to be, where points of interest are going to be, because they constantly change. So you can't build a level knowing that the objective is going to be placed here, and you're going to look for the exit here, and you entered from here. So these are the difficulties that we had to address with lighting and architecture, and keeping in mind that some areas have even 6 points of entries or exits that can be blocked off, or where you're going to go. So that was a big difficulty for level design, and trying to figure it out with a lot of UI elements and lighting elements. So it's not like usually in games you know exactly when you want something to be pointed out. You can build corridor towards it. You can build lights exactly at that place and draw attention. But this wasn't the case. So that was the difficulty. And from a technical standpoint, there wasn't a big problem at this point. There is still not a problem about loading times, but about since we're doing it in Unreal and it's procedurally generated, we're using dynamic lights. So there's a lot of optimization, because we cannot bake the lights and have a static atmosphere in one level. That it always changes, and you can switch it off, switch it on, depending again on what is going on in that specific area. Yeah, there's a lot of difficulty actually.
Is there an element of character customization? Is there an element of weapon customization, stuff like that? And how does that, if it's there, how does that work within the game?
As for the player, you start off with a basic suit. We don't have choosing different types of characters or types of classes, but along the game you can find a lot of different suits and suit parts and craft them, or find each one individually and make combinations will affect your stats. And the main weapon is the pet gun, that it's a biological sentient weapon. And the idea, just like with everything else in the game, is that it's that you can combine it to get something that you want. You can attach different types of ammunition and power upgrades to it, and combine your perfect weapon that suits your playstyle. It can be part machine gun, part flamethrower, and you can extend its magazine or add additional effects to it, as well as having the pet gun go and jump on the enemies and be an independent like your pet. There are going to be a few secondary weapons that you can also find along, but we really wanted to focus on this main weapon, since we want the players to feel attached to it, give it kind of like a living aspect.
So you can upgrade the gun itself. Can you kind of upgrade your character? Like, does the game have any kind of skills tree or like a ranking or XP system?
Well, there is an it's not exactly XP. There is a proficiency system that, like, by doing things you will get better at them. We do have a roguelite element where you're going to be searching through the derelicts. You're going to find these machines that they can boost you during the missions.
You'd mentioned the crafting system. Can you craft in the levels themselves, or is that something you can only do before you go into them?
You have your own hub ship, and the hub ship is your hub that you can change your suit, and you can look at your space map and see where you want to go in the galaxy, which part of the galaxy and which ship you're going to board. And you can also create, like I said, the pet gun and combine it in your way.
Do your enemies, can they pick up on kind of your play style and kind of almost like a Dark Souls aspect where they learn how you play, how you approach combat, and then they kind of adapt to that?
No, we didn't go that way. We went with a combination and surprising you with what kind of attachments they're going to have. So there are big enemies that can take on, attach to themselves, smaller critter enemies, and each of these critter enemies gives them special abilities. Like if you get a tentacle, a crawling tentacle that jumps on these enemies, that crawling tentacle is going to give it a longer melee distance, and it's going to be able to grab your pet and throw it back at you. They have these crawling blaster enemy types that, again, if they attach the bigger enemies, they can get long range weapons. They attach more of these, they can just shoot at you a lot more and become more dangerous. So it's about enemies getting different combinations from these smaller ones and acting differently each time they get it. So you don't exactly know, even if you do see a type of enemy, like a shape of an enemy, it can behave and do different things depending on these smaller enemies.
So the enemies are procedurally generated as well, correct?
They're not procedural generated. They're just able to combine with. We definitely have an element of randomness of what is going to be spawned, like what types of enemies and what combinations, and they can combine. But you can also grab these smaller creatures yourself with your pet gun and use them to your advantage. So there's also an incentive for the player to look around and not alert everything, just see what is crawling around in the dark, get those small things before they get them or shoot them.
What has proven to be the hardest part of developing this game? From the procedurally generated aspect of it to the horror aspects to the bringing in the narrative, kind of what was the hardest thing for you guys to key in on?
One part was definitely procedural generated levels, to keep them to feel like it's a ship that you feel is realistic, and combining all those things to not look either ugly or illogical. And the other is the AI of the monsters, because it keeps changing with all these combinations, and they have to adapt to every new aspect, both that they get from the creatures and the way that the player will attack them. Because so all these combinations and situations proved to be very difficult inside, again, a ship that changes constantly and situations that change constantly. So keeping the monsters aware and believable, just knowing how to attack and how to approach the player and the basic behavior of the monster. Those things, I think, are the most difficult. We're still struggling with some aspects of it at this point, so there's a lot of debugging going on every time we introduce a new feature or a new creature that behaves slightly differently. It creates problems all over the place.
The multiplayer aspect of the game, I know a lot of developers kind of stay away from it because they say there's a lot of technical issues and problems when you're trying to implement it. I guess with you guys, it's slightly different because it's not player versus player, but has that proven to be any kind of an obstacle for you guys? Or
it is an obstacle, I mean, because it's procedurally generated, and having all three players having the same situation and keeping everything synchronized is a problem. And probably when we start testing it with more people, we'll find out how many more problems there are lying underneath. But so far, like, the Unreal has a pretty solid base base for multiplayer. So it's not like we built it from scratch. That there is a good basis for it. But yeah, we definitely had a lot of problems, and it's playable. Like we're playing it in multiplayer all the time, but we're always seeing some new bugs at this point.
Talk to me about the roadmap leading into next year and keying in on when you guys are planning on early access and kind of the content map after that.
We're not sure if it's going to be early access. It's not decided yet, so we're probably going to release it as a full release.
Okay.
That's the mindset now. It might change, but that's the idea right now. So what we're planning now is to finish the alpha version of the game, so get the whole playable campaign with all the upgrades and all the major features up and running at early 2022, so we can start having small closed tests. And after that, when we get the feedback, we're going to map out how many months we realistically need to launch a proper game after that. We're not going to publish like an early access game that is missing some crucial elements to it.
Do you guys, I know it's going to PC, but is it also, do you have any plans for porting it to console at this point, or is that?
We do.
Okay.
We do have plans, definitely. It also depends on how difficult it's going to be to port it to consoles because of all these features that we have. But yeah, definitely we're thinking that it has to reach consoles as well. So that's going to also be something that we're going to start doing early next year.
And there you have it. There's RIPOUT. It is an FPS game set in the horror genre with a whole lot of action going on in between. All of their social media and website stuff is down below. Make sure you check them out. Make sure you show them love. And while you're at it, why not subscribe for more content on the way and click on the videos that are about to appear on either side of me. But until next time, I am Nick. This is The Side Quest, and I will see you later.